Back to our top story, Sudan. We now have our guest, Anne Fitz-Gerald. She's the director of the Balsillie School of International Affairs in Toronto. Anne, good to see you. You know, we've been hearing about a ceasefire for days. It hasn't been a real one. Do you foresee any decent hope of a ceasefire anytime soon?
Well, I think this is an addition to the failed ceasefires we have already seen over the past 2 weeks. Hopes are not high for any successful ceasefire moving forward because this is valuable time at the moment for both of the warring factions in their attempt to make gains on each other. And those gains will be aimed in 3 different directions. 1, to win the support of the people. 2, to win the support of the international community, to project themselves as legitimate state actors, each of which deserves a seat at some sort of negotiating table. And lastly, to sustain the support of their fighters, which are fundamental for any military victory. What we know for sure is neither of these leaders want to exist under the other.
Is this, I mean, if the army didn't respond to the RSF, would this not then be yet another coup for Sudan, which has seen no fewer than a dozen over the last, 50 or so years?
Yeah, this is devastating for the Sudanese people and the pathway to democracy that they have long awaited and long hoped for. But there are fundamental differences in the way these warring sides perceive each other. The Sudanese Armed Forces is a long-standing military command structure, and the RSF is a relatively new paramilitary structure that was developed in 2013, almost as a deal done between the former President Omar al-Bashir and one of the commanders of what was formerly known as the Janjaweed militia, which helped al-Bashir's government crush many of the rebel groups, the anti-government rebel groups operating in the Darfur region. So when you have an unconsolidated military structure with 2 separate chains of command, one through a military command structure and the other one directly to the president, there are bound to be difficulties in the future. And we have seen this elsewhere in Africa very recently, even in the Horn of Africa region.
So is there any indication of who is winning this at this point?
Well, as ever in these situations, it's very difficult to get good quality evidence-based information from the ground because this is a war zone and the risk is just too high and the duty of care to people too important to have people reporting openly from the ground. I have spoken with friends and former students, some of whom are still in Khartoum, some of whom have suggested to me that the death count and injury account is grossly underestimated. They observe bodies all over the streets. They observe people still trapped in schools, universities, hospitals. They are seeing thousands fleeing by the hour into the countryside, at which point those groups have to make the difficult decision as to whether or not they keep going by foot or very expensive black market priced bus rides to refugee camps, or whether they take the risk and go back into Khartoum if they are foreign nationals to evacuation points that are also sitting in the battle space, or make the risky journey up to Port Sudan for evacuation from there. I think we've seen this war play out as urban warfare, with the RSF staying around their strongholds in Khartoum, but then that is being targeted by way of air power, which the Sudanese armed forces have control over. But the collateral damage is devastating, and we're seeing this fight for military victory go on, and I think the Sudanese armed forces will regard the RSF as a paramilitary force that is in defiance of a united, consolidated structure.
All right, Anne, really good to talk to you about this. And when you hear these reports of tens of thousands fleeing already, nearly 100,000, and reports of things like there are armed men inside a scientific facility storing samples of deadly diseases, you understand why the UN is making these very dire warnings. Appreciate the conversation. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.